I'm sure the other guys, hopefully by then they'll be on board. Year of Learning, Sue and Aaron Yegerelik, in memory of Malka Pearl Man and Philip Man, and Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Henya Rivka Perel Brozna bas Arav Tzvi Hirsch, in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust. Arav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch. Shall share her children and grandchildren in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva. Marsha Federbush and family in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Arav Shimon. Sharon and Fred Liska, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edel Bas Yaakov. Leslie and Gail Kaplan in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Sedell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avrameir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, China Bas Yeshaya. Friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov. Friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom, and Yitzchak Halevi. Month of Learning by Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her mother, Yita bat Nachman ben Yamin, Mel and Haran Haller, in memory of his brother, Yaakov ben Abraham, Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of his father, David ben Fishel Halevi, and her mother, Bela Bas Avraham. Also a month of learning by Stephanie and Fred Mortman for the refuah shlema of her daughter, Mazal bat Sarah Malka. And today, the 17th, right? Day of learning by Bob and Paula Bromberg, in memory of his father, Shlomo ben Nasser Yitzchak Isaac Halevi. The Shemas have an aliyah, Krank Rafir, Valti Shir Shema Tliah, and Lachol ben Israel, good ben Shtiar.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen.
Bob was providing a tikkun this morning, both on site and the grab and go bags. So that was in honor of his father's yortzeit. May the Shema have an aliyah.
Amen.
Okay. I'm going to try to talk to the rabbi about doing the daf in the building, both on Zoom as well. And now that he's back, and some people are out from the other group who've been going by phone to Rabbi Sugarman, have also asked about our starting the daf in the building again. So we are moving to look to see when we might be able to do that, okay? All right, today's daf, really we're going to start on 67a with the Gemara, okay? And we're going to deal with the question of how many rest stops, how many they call it booths, Sukkot, but I think rest stops is just as understandable, contemporary. Okay, did the person who was taking out the Mishtaleach, the scapegoat, were available to him? And we're going to see there's a difference of opinion. And as part of that also, some further discussion on what actually took place when it came time to deal with this animal. Okay. Just a brief reminder that we'll be finishing up this Gemara after into July, about the second week in July. Okay. All right. Want to point out as we get to the Gemara, Dev is on, I'm sure the other guys, right, will be getting on, that this difference of opinion as we get into the Gemara as to how many rest stops were available, okay, may very well depend on the fact that we said earlier that this was to be done on Shabbat as well. And even though the Gemara informed us that the Tchum Shabbat was D'Rabbanan, nevertheless, it would appear that at least some are of the opinion that that had to be applied in this situation as well. Okay? So if you have the requirement of Tchum Shabbat under these circumstances, we'll sort of see that shortly. Okay. So we went through the Mishnah, right? It talked about the stops. It then talked about his tying crimson strip, right? And question of when his garments became impure. Well, first we get to the topic of the rest stops. Tana Rabbanan, says the Gemara. The Rabbi said, Eser Sukkot Ushnei Asar Milin Hayu, that there were 10 rest stops, and the distance between Jerusalem and the place of the cliff was 12 mil. Okay? Divrei Rabbi Meir. So that's the view of Rabbi Meir. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Teisha Sukkot, that there were 9 rest stops. Va'asara milin, and the distance was basically 10 mil. Okay? And if that were the case, then basically people could escort the person from one rest stop to another. Okay? Rabbi Yossi Omer, says Rabbi Yossi, Chamesh Sukkot va'asara milin hayu. Okay? He claims, Rabbi Yossi, that there were only 5 rest stops, and again they were this total distance of 10 mil from Jerusalem to the cliff. The Chulan al Yedei Eruv. Okay, and says Rabbi Yossi, in addition, that they allowed the people to utilize an Eruv to be able to go and either walk part of the way, greet the person, bring him back to the rest stop, and then others at that same rest stop would go and escort him part of the way towards the next location. So the Gemara continues. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said as follows, right? The following. Sachli Elazar bani. My son Elazar told me the following. And the Gemara is going to actually have to deal with this statement as well shortly. Im al yedei eruv, if they were able to utilize an eruv, yecholani la'asot afilu shtei sukkot va'asara mili. It would be possible to say that maybe there were even only 2 rest stops, and it was still a distance of 10 mil. Okay, how would that be possible? Okay, so 2 mil between each rest stop would be 4,000 cubits. Okay, and so therefore, again, people in Jerusalem could establish an Eruv 2,000 amah away, escort the person halfway, but people in the first rest stop, right, could also establish an Eruv 2,000 cubits closer to Jerusalem. So they could go halfway, right, and meet him and bring him to the rest stop. Other people at that first rest stop, having established an Eruv of 2,000 cubits the opposite direction, could likewise, and so on. That seems to be the point. Okay? So the Gemara then clarifies. Kiman azlaha Tanya chutz me acharon shabahen shelo higia imo letzuk. Okay? In accordance to whose view? Right? Kiman azlaha. According to who is that? That teaches Okay, chutz umeacharon, all right, and therefore that, except for the last person, shelo higia imo, that they couldn't go to him up to the cliff. Ela omed mirachok v'ro'et ma'asav. Okay, that the one person would stay at the last booth to observe the whole deeds of the person bringing the goat. Keman, according to whom might that be? Rabbi Meir. That could be the view of Rabbi Meir. Now, the Mishnah did teach as follows: Al kol sukkah v'sukkah, omrim lo harei mazon v'harei mayim. At each rest stop, they said, here is food and here is water. And we raised the question, well, why are they dafka on Yom Kippur, right? Tana, and we can teach as follows: Me'olam lo hutzrach adam lechach. A person, however, never needed that food or drink. Ela she'eino domeh mi sheyesh lo pat b'sal. But one can't compare a person who has, so to speak, bread in his basket. In other words, he has access to that item. Lami she'en lo pat b'salo, to one who doesn't have bread in his basket. In other words, if a person were to need it, okay, their hunger, their thirst would be greater if they knew they couldn't have access to it. Okay? Now, we get to a new piece from our Mishnah. Mahaya oseh, what would he do when he reached the cliff edge? Cholek lashon shel zohorit. He would tear in half, okay, a strip of crimson. V'niktarei kulei besela. So says the Gemara, so let him tie the entire strip of crimson to a rock. Answers the Gemara, Kevan de mitzvah b'sa'ir, since his mitzvah was in dealing with the goat, dilma kadim umalbin, perhaps then we're afraid that this crimson thread, okay, would turn white before he actually completed all of the undertaking with the goat. And therefore, umityava da'ate, and therefore his mind would be preoccupied with that, and he wouldn't complete the procedure with the goat. Right? So what happens, says the Gemara, in other words, he wouldn't even push the goat off the cliff. Right? So the Gemara then says, V'niktarei kulei bein karnav. So instead, if we're concerned about his preoccupation with the goat, so let us say that he should tie the whole crimson strip to the horns of the goat. So the Gemara answers, Zimnin digame shlei l'reishe. It's possible that the goat will turn its head, okay, or that its head will be not visible, the crimson strip, as it falls down the cliff. And therefore he won't know whether the crimson strip turned white to show a sign of atonement. The lav ada'ate, and therefore he won't know. He won't be aware of it. Therefore the Gemara tells us, Tanu Rabbanan, says a Braita, Berishona, Havu koshrim lashon shel zohorit al petech ha'olam mibachutz, that originally they would tie the crimson strip outside of the entranceway to the ulam. Hilbin, once it turned white, hayu smechin, the people were joyful. Lo hilbin, if it did not turn white, hayu atzevim umitbaishim, the people were sad and embarrassed, ashamed. Therefore, hitkinu shehiyu koshrin al petach ulam mibifnim. The rabbis then made an enactment that they would tie the crimson strip in the ulam indoors, inside. V'adayan hayu motzitzin v'ro'im. But the people still would look through and try to observe carefully what the status of it was. Hilbin, if it turned white. Hayu smechin, they were happy. Lo hilbin, if they did not turn white. Hayu atzevin, they were sad. Therefore, a third step. Hitkinu shehiyu koshrin oto chetzio basela v'chetzio bein karnav. And thus they made a third decree, right? That they would tie the crimson strip in half, being on a rock, and half on the horns of the goat. Now, therefore, that way they would be able to tell, okay, the people would not know what the status would be until the person who was the bringer of the goat reported back to them that night at the end of Yom Kippur. Okay? Because remember, the Mishnah told us after he took care of the goat, he had to go back to the last rest stop and wait there till it was dark.
Right.
Okay? And so therefore, he did not come back to Jerusalem till Ois Yom Kippur. Okay. So what happens? Amar Rabbi Nachman Bar Papa Mishum Rabbi Elazar HaKapar. Rabbi Nachman Bar Papa in the name of Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar. Barishona Hayu Koshrin Lashon Zuhurit Al Petach Ulam Mibifnim. Telling us the same thing, right? That they tied it on the outside of the Ulam. Okay? He claims that they tied it there in the inside first. V'kevan shehigia sa'ir lamidbar, and once the goat reached the desert, hayamal bin, it then it was turning white. V'yadu shene'aseit mitzvato, and they would know then that the mitzvah was completed. Shene'amar, as it says in a pasuk, im yihiyu chata'echem kashanim kasheleg yalbinu. Okay, if the sins be as wool, as red like crimson, they'll be then turn white as wool. Okay? Now, a new piece from our Mishnah. Lo hayam magia lemachtzit hahar. What happens, okay, if the goat would reach halfway down the mountain, right, and it wasn't torn apart? Ibayalahu. So they asked, Otane varim, mahen bahana'a. Those same limbs of the goat, can one benefit from them? Rav and Shmuel had this machloket. Chad amar mutarin, one said it was permitted, v'chad amar asurin, and one said it was forbidden. Manda amar mutarin, according to the one who said it was permitted, Tichtiv, why? Because it says b'midbar, in the desert, right? Umanda amar asurin, tichtiv gzeira, and the one who said it was forbidden based it on the pasuk, part of the pasuk, that it said that it had to be cut off, namely that there is a prohibition there. Umanda amar asurin, and according to the one who said it was forbidden, Hai midbar ma'yavivle. What does he do then to explain the fact that the other pasuk said the goat bear on all its iniquities to a land which is cut off and shall let the goat go to the wilderness? How does he explain that? Mibayele l'kedetanya. He needs it as it was taught elsewhere in a Braita. Hamidbara, Bamidbar, that there are actually three references, right? The Rabbot, Nov, V'Giv'on, Shiloh, Ubeit Olamim. That the other references include the fact that the same procedure was done when the Mishkan was in these other locations, in Nov, in Giv'on, and Shiloh, aside from being done in the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. V'idach, and the other. What is he saying? Right? Hai gzera, when the pasuk says, right, that clearly it says that it will be cut off, right, to a land that's cut off, right? Hai gzera mayavedle. What does he do with that phrase, right? Mibayale l'kedetanya. He requires it also as it's written in a Braita. Gzera, ein gzera ela chatucha. When it says cut off, okay, it means nothing other than really removed, cut. Davar acher, or another explanation, ein gzera ela davar hamitgazer v'yored. Except it means cut off. It means from a place, a thing that is sticks out where the item will fall, and the escarpment, if I can use that term, okay, will have rocks sticking out that will cause the cutting of the animal as it falls down the cliffside. Okay. Davar acher, or another possible explanation of Gzera, Shema Tomar, Maaseh Tofu, Tohu Hu. Perhaps you'll say that this pushing off of the goat is a meaningless act. It's almost like magic. Talmud Lomar, Ani Hashem. However, the pasuk says, I am the Lord. Ani Hashem gizarti, ve'em lecha reshut laharher bahem. I am Hashem, and I have decreed, therefore, that you have no right to have doubts about it, to question it. So, Amar Rava, and Rava now points out, Mistabra keman Amar mutarim. It seems logical to maybe agree with the one who says these limbs would be permitted. Lo amra Torah shalach l'takala. Why? Because the Torah does not clearly, I'm going to use the word mandate, this requirement by saying send the goat out. Okay, that's language is missing, and therefore, as a result, okay, we might think, well, perhaps then by not doing so, there could be some mishap in understanding how the atonement process is to be concluded. So, the Braita now, a new Braita, Tanu Rabbanan. We said one of the goats through the lottery was designated to Hashem, and one was designated to Azalzel. Now, what do we mean, Azalzel? Says the Braita, Sheyehe Oz V'Kasheh. In other words, that location should be such that it should be rough, hard, okay, and tough. In other words, that's certainly going to bring about the death of the animal. Yechol b'yishuv. Maybe I would say, well, maybe you simply take it to another habitable location. Talmud Lomar b'midbar, but it said in the wilderness. Uminayin shebatzuk Talmud Lomar. And how do we know then it has to deal with a cliff? Says the text, Gezerah, that it says it has to be able to cut it off. Tanya Idach, or another Braita teaches, Azalzel. When we say Azalzel, Kasheh Shebaharim, that it's got to be tough, okay, among the mountains. V'chein hu amer, ve'et elei haaretz lekach. So there, Azalzel is a play on the word Ayil, right? Elei, the mighty, the strong of the land. Okay, so it must mean that it is a serious cliff side. Okay, Tana Debe Rabbi Yishmael, And the school of Rabbi Yishmael suggests another drasha, Azazel. What do we mean from that? Shemechaper al maaseh uza va'azael. That it comes to bring atonement for the acts of Uzzah and Azael. Now, who are Uzzah and Azael? We go back to Breshit chapter 6. We see those are the names of individuals who were considered, okay, the sons of God, and they were the ones who had inappropriate relations with the daughters of men. Okay, and that was the cause, according to some Meforshim, some of the Rebbeim, Chazal, for the flood. Okay, we come to a new Braita. Tanu Rabbanan, says this Braita. Et mishpati ta'asu. Says the Chazal that the verse cited implies you shall do my ordinances, laws, right? Davarim she'ilmale lo nichtavu dinhu she'ikatvu. Okay. Since we mentioned the flood and the inappropriate behavior, this Braita sort of transgresses to discuss this by saying there are certain things that we could say if it weren't written, then dinhu, it seems reasonable, logical, even almost legally required that they should have been written. The Eluhaim, and what are these kinds of things? Avodah Zarah, idol worship, Gilui Arayot, right, inappropriate sexual behavior, Shvichut Damim, okay, a murder, V'gazel, and robbery, Uberkat Hashem, and blessing of Hashem, of course, is a euphemism, right, for the opposite, blasphemy. Ve'et chukotai tishmoru, and my laws you shall observe. Dvarim shahasatan meshiv aleha. These are matters which I'm going to phrase it this way, that says Satan and others, in other words, that the nations really challenge their Jewish practices that don't seem to have clearly rationale, okay, behind them, and therefore they're questioned. The Eluhain, and what are they? Achilat chazir, the prohibition of eating pig, ulevishat shatnez, the requirement in terms of, again, a prohibition of wearing mixed garments, v'chalitzat yivama, and the whole question of, okay, the status then of the yivama, okay, and chalitza, v'taharat mitzorah, and the purification process for somebody who is what we'll call for the moment a leper, right? The Sa'ir Hamishtaleach, and the scapegoat. So here it comes back to our topic, right? The Shema Tomar, and perhaps one might say, or you might say, Maaseh Tohuhem, that these are, again, inappropriate activities, magical, no real religious substance to them. Talmud Lomar, Ani Hashem. I am the Lord. Ani Hashem Chakakti. I am the Lord that established these, right? I enforce them. I inscribe them. Ve'en lecha reshut laharher bahem. And you have no right to question or doubt them. Now, back then to our discussion regarding our Mishnah. Okay? Remember we've said that the person who got assigned, designated in advance to do the taking out of this animal, Midrash implied that that person died within the year. But there's another aspect of this component that the Mishnah said, that if the person was tameh, they still carried out their responsibility. Okay? And so the Gemara then comes back with this statement, Ematai metame bigadim. At what point do the Tanaim say, okay, that the garments of the person who led the animal out are tameh? Tana Rabbanan, says the Braita, Hamishaleach metame bigadim, that the one who leads the goat out, the scapegoat, his clothes become impure. Ve'ein hasholeach et hamishaleach metame bigadim. But the person who has designated the accompanier to the goat, okay, that person's garments do not become impure. Yechol mishayetze chutz lechomat hazara. We might think that those begadim become tameh once the person exits the walls of Jerusalem. Talmud lomar ha mishaleach. This is why the pasuk says the one who is just bringing it out. I ha mishaleach. If you're saying it's the one who carries it out, leads it out, yechol ad sheyagia letzuk. I might therefore think that the clothes do not become tameh until he reaches the cliff, right? Talmud lomar ve hamishaleach, and the one who dispatches. Haketzad, how is that then to be understood? Mi sheyatsa chutz lechomat Yerushalayim, divrei Rebbe Yehuda. Rebbe Yehuda says it's the one after he emerges outside the walls of Jerusalem. Rabbi Yossi, as we continue, disagrees. And he says, it says in the pasuk, Azazel v'chibes, that he dispatches the goat and to Azazel, and then washes, which he would say, Rabbi Yossi, ad shehigia letzuk. It doesn't become tameh, the garments, until he reaches the cliff. Rabbi Shimon omer, v'hamishaleach et hasa'ir la'azalzel yichabes begadav. Citing the more complete, if you will, pasuk, that the one who dispatches the goat to Azazel will wash his garments. Zorko bevat rosh umetame begadim. Namely, what happens? He throws it, namely the animal, from the top, from the head of the cliff, and then his garments become tameh. Okay? And that finishes the discussion of that particular text. Now, we continue now with looking at a new Mishnah, right? What happens next, right? We went through a discussion of the fact that the sprinkling had to be done inside, first the Kodshe Kadoshim, then inside the Hechal on the Parochet, then on the Mizbeach. We've talked about the Hagrala, the lottery, and part of the first confession, okay? And the dispatching of the goat. So now we continue in the next Mishnah. Balo Eitzel Par V'Sa'ir HaNisrafin. The high priest now comes, okay, and he hands those parts of the two animals. Remember, he caught the blood had been stirred. He took the blood of those two animals, right, that was sprinkled at one point separately, and then later the blood was mixed. So you still have the bodies of those animals. Okay. Now, normally what happens is if they're going to present body parts on the altar, what do? They normally would, right, remove the hides of the animals. And those hides normally, depending on the situation, went to the Kohens. And then they would take the body parts, they would wave them, they would burn them, right? Depending upon, they would cook them and eat some of it, depending upon what kind of a offering it was. Okay? So the Mishnah is telling us the following. The Kohen Gadol then, Balo Eitzel Parvis Sa'ir Hanisrafim. He would come to those animals, the bull and the goat, that were to be burned. Kira'an, he would, well, we might say tear them. I believe actually he would cut the body parts. Vahotziat emurehen, he would then remove the inner organs, right, that needed to be put on the mizbeach. Natanan b'magis, right, he would put these organs into a bowl, a large bowl, a tub, actually. Vehiktiran al gabei hamizbeach, and then they were to be offered and burned on the mizbeach. Now, what happened? What about those pieces? Kila'an b'miklaot. And there's a different views here between Rashi and Tosafot on what is being done next. According to the Mishnah, it says that he then took these strips of the two animals and he made them into braids. Okay. Now we don't know for sure. That's why I said there's quickly this machloket, what that really meant. So let's see if as we go into the Mishnah a little more. Vahotzian lebeit hasreifa, and they took those braids, okay, and they brought them out to the Beit Sreifa. Okay, we said that was a place outside the walls of Jerusalem where, okay, remains of sacrifices were burnt. Umei matai mitam'in begadim. And again, the people that brought those braids of animal parts, bodies, when did their garments become tameh? Mishayatzu chutz lechomat ha'azara. Once they got outside, once they got outside of the wall, right? Rabbi Shimon Omer, according, it says Rabbi Shimon, Mishayatzit ha'ur beruban. He claims differently. It was only once the fire began to really catch the most of these animal parts. Okay, that was when the fire ignited most of the parts of the bull and the goat. Okay, now Gemara here starts. Vehiktiran salka da'atach. You're suggesting that they burned them. Ela ema, rather better, I would say, lahaktiran al gabei hamizbeach, right? That they should be burnt upon the altar. Now, kila'an, when it says that they made them, they wove them into braids. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kimin kli'ah. It was a kind of braid. Okay, Tana, and the Braita teaches, Lo haya menachtan nituche basar ola. Okay, they would not going to say cut up, right? These braids, like they would the meat for a burnt offering. Ella or al gabe basar, but they allowed the hide, the skin, to remain on the meat. Menahani mili, how do we know this? Okay, Titania, we have a Braita that teaches. Rebbe Omer says, Rebbe ne'emar kan or ubasar. It says here that there's the skin and the meat and the excrement. V'ne'emar lahalan or ubasar uperes. And it's also said there, skin, flesh, and the excrement. Okay? So just to go over a tiny bit on 68, ma lahalan al yedei nituach v'lo al yedei hefshet, afkan al yedei nituach v'lo al yedei hefshet. So just as here, right? Okay, we do it by nituach, by cutting, in other words, dissecting it, and not by skinning it. So likewise here, we do it by cutting, dissecting it, and not by skinning it. Okay? So we're going to stop there for today, all right? Because the Gemara then wants to go into a little bit more detail, okay, in that process, okay? And then it's going to jump into that whole question of when these individuals who brought these things out to the place to be burned, when their garments become tameh, as similarly as we saw the discussion with the person leading the goat out of the camp. Okay?
Kenny, isn't it in today's Hebrew, nituach is surgery, right?
Right. Nituach in modern Hebrew is
surgery.
Exactly. So it's interesting to see that.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a Lashon Nakia too.
What?
It's a Lashon Nakia here, and not to say like it's ripped apart, but it's surgically removed.
Uh-huh. Okay, everybody. Bob, we want to give you a Yasher Koach on davening. Okay. May Yeshua have an aliyah. And
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I took one.